So, hello friends. Today we'll start with the first chapter of economic survey, that is state of economy. So, before I start the first chapter of economic survey, the economic survey has given some introductory lines, or they want to give the global scenario as a context in which they have prepared the economic survey, because the economic survey is going to give lot of information and also analysis. So in which context they are dealing with this economic survey? What was the present condition as far as the economy is concerned? So that was discussed here, and the global uncertainties are rife and a lot of people aware about these global uncertainties. Barely had the pandemic receded, war in Ukraine broke out in February 2022. We are all aware this decade, that means in the year 2020, we have started with a pandemic. That pandemic has directly impacted the whole world for continuously 1.5 year. After that, it started receding. The moment when it start receding, again the world experienced a major geopolitical conflict, that is Russia-Ukraine war. So barely the pandemic is receding, Russia-Ukraine war broke out. When Russia-Ukraine war broke out, the cumulative impact of both COVID-19 and as well as the Russia-Ukraine war has severely disrupted the global supply chains. That severe disruption of the global supply chain has led to the increase in prices, that led to the inflation, that led to the reduction in exports, that led to the cost of imports. That is how it has impacted. Now, after Russia-Ukraine war, so Russia-Ukraine war started around in February 2022. Initially, the Russia-Ukraine impact has so severe on global supply chains. When the world is ready to deal with this disruption caused by the Russia-Ukraine, there was another severe impact has started affecting, that is central banks of the advanced countries have started tightening the monetary policy. During the COVID-19 time, they have pumped more amount of money because people don't have enough incomes. In order to kickstart the economy, definitely you must put money in the hands of the people. That is what the Keynesian theory says, and many of the developed countries and some of the developing countries has followed that strategy. But there is a problem with that strategy, because if you don't inject the money carefully, that creates the inflation. That is what exactly happened in developed countries. The inflation has reached to the 40 years, 30 years high. Then immediately to control the inflation, they have started increasing the interest rates. When the central banks of the advanced economies has tightening the monetary policy by increasing the interest rates, then immediately that has its own impact on the whole world economy. The entire foreign capital started moving away from the developing countries and it entered the developed countries, and that has impacted the developing world. So that means three back-to-back impacts have severely affected especially India. It impacted other countries also, but this is a context. Normally, any economic crisis, it comes and it will vanish over a period of time. But here, three back to back. Initially, COVID-19, when we are barely recovering from COVID-19, again Russia-Ukraine war, again when we are just taking a relax from the Russia-Ukraine war, though it has not completed, but still India well prepared for it. But unfortunately, this tight monetary policy of advanced economies has again impacted severely. Many developing countries, particularly in the South Asian region, faced a severe economic stress. Weakening of currency, higher import prices, rising cost of living and stronger dollar making the debt servicing more expensive. Because when the United States of America started increasing the interest rate, that has led to the attracting of more investments from the developing world, that portfolio investment that led to the strengthening of dollar. If dollar is strengthening means automatically rupee get weakened, and if rupee get weakened, it has its own impact on the imports, it has its own impact on the debt servicing. So that is how it impacted. So this is the background in which we are discussing the economic survey. But though we have such global challenge, the economic survey is also giving like there are some positive conditions for India. One is India had a good monsoon and reservoir levels are higher than last year and the 10-year average. So that means there is a good monsoon in India. If there is a good monsoon, there is a good agricultural growth. If there is a good agricultural growth, almost 50% of the people are depending, 45 to 50% of the people are depending on agriculture. Certainly it enhances the income of those people. Definitely it is a driving force for the growth of the economy. That is one positive thing. The fundamentals of the Indian economy are sound. Yes, even though we are facing the three back-to-back impacts, but the Indian economy's fundamentals are so strong. Whether it can be GDP growth, whether it can be debt level compared to the other countries, whether it can be related to the level of inflation, whether it can be foreign exchange reserves, like other parameters, we are so strong. Policies pursued carefully and consciously have ensured that the recovery is robust and sustainable. So normally when any economic crisis or any crisis that impacts the economy occurs, we must have a careful policy. And here the government of India has taken a careful and conscious policy so that the recovery has become sustainable. See, today that some of the developed countries during the COVID-19, everyone suddenly fell down, and after that they have started grown. But what happened after that? Is it really moving in the same sustainable trajectory? Same sustainable trajectory? No, some countries are not. Some countries are severely impacted with inflation. But whereas when it comes to the India, because of the careful and conscious policies, again we have reached to the pre-pandemic level. And on the pre-pandemic level, in spite of having these many challenges, we are maintaining our growth in a sustainable way. So the policies that we have taken, the fundamentals, the strong that we have, and also the good monsoon, these are the positive conditions for India. So in this background, we are discussing the economic survey. So the state of the economy 2020-23 recovery complete. So the survey is saying like the recovery is already completed. That means we reached to the pre-pandemic level. So we are all aware about the global shocks. Just now I mentioned 3 global shocks that have impacted India. Even the IMF in its World Economic Outlook, the IMF in its World Economic Outlook has forecasted a lesser growth for 2023. So definitely a lesser global growth will also impact the India's growth, because after globalization, a country's growth will certainly depending on the world economy, because exports are key part of our GDP. Normally when you are calculating the GDP, you will say C plus G plus I plus export minus imports. That means exports and imports will have an impact on GDP growth. If exports are increasing, then we'll do the more production that lead to the more GDP growth, and that creates a lot of employment. But if the global economy is not good, definitely there is no much demand for your products, so the exports comes down, that impact the GDP growth, that impact the employment. So that is one more concern that the IMF has already said, like the world growth may come down, and some people projected for a recession, but we don't know exactly the severity of the recession, because the level at which the recession is going to occur initially projected was severe, but now they have moderated. So despite these agencies, worldwide continues to project India's the fastest growing major economy at 6.5 to 7%. Okay, in spite of having that global challenges and also the world economic, but all the forecasters, whoever, because lot of agencies a lot of multilateral institutions, normally they will give the forecast. So in that forecast, on average, India grows at 6.5 to 7% in the financial year 23. This is the highest growth in the major economies, highest growth. So economic survey has given the various the crisis that the world has seen in the last century, especially related to the economy. Spanish flu, Great Depression, oil, that is in the second decade of the 20th century. Later in 1929, Great Depression, oil crisis of 1970s, East Asian crisis of 1997, global recession of 2008, and the taper tantrum in the post 2008 scenario, and a trade war between major economies like like China and United States of America when Donald Trump was the president. So that has impacted the world economy. But now there are three important things that I have already mentioned: pandemic, Russia-Ukraine war, and monetary tightening. And with this, the global stagflation has occurred because they are unable to increase the production. The global growth is going to be stagnant. Now in this condition, some countries started feeling like we must protect their own national economies, and they are entering into a protective stance. That means they are going to protect their own economy. They don't allow imports. They don't much depend on exports. They will simply produce, and they'll ask the domestic consumer to consume. So these protectionistic policies are not good for the global recovery and recovery of individual countries, but still the uncertainties that are created is leading to this protectionistic tendencies. That is another important danger that we are facing. And China experienced a considerable slowdown induced by its policies. We are all aware China has followed a zero COVID-19 policy, and zero COVID-19 policy has created a lot of problems, and especially that has reduced the economic activity in China. That is, it has its own impact on the global and as well as the Indian economy. Anyway, now they are moving out of these zero COVID policies. But when we are discussing about the performance of the economy in the last 1 year, certainly we must also consider the Chinese impact. And medium term challenge, yes, apart from the short term, there is a medium term challenge. What is that medium term challenge? Because of the pandemic, lot of people has lost the education and as well as the income earning opportunities. So there was a loss of education and loss of income earning opportunities for almost 2 years. So you may not see the results of this loss immediately, but in the medium term, definitely it is a challenge. That is what survey is discussing. Yeah. So this is how survey gives the graphs, and they will give some data analysis. So that is what you have to draw the conclusion from these tables. Okay. So sharp rise in commodity prices due to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, prices yet to reach the pre-conflict level. So because of the global supply chain disruption, the level of prices of some commodities has increased, and it has to reach pre-Russia-Ukraine conflict level. So it has started in the February 2022. So these are the pre-conflict prices. They are high. Okay. In some cases they are low, but in some cases they are high. So if you see that, you can understand. Now, especially you see the prices of the fertilizers and prices of the crude oil. The level of increase of prices in fertilizers is very high, very high. In crude oil also there is an increase, but the rate is not that high to compare to that of the fertilizers. Even coal prices increases. Food prices increases, but not to that extent of the petrol and fertilizers. Okay. Inflation, they have given inflation related in both advanced economies and as well as the emerging markets. Normally inflation in the advanced economies is low. Normally the inflation in the emerging economies are normally high. But if you see from February 21, and here they have given February 21. See, the normal inflation level in the emerging markets is something above some 5 and above 5, majority countries. Okay. So, but whereas when it comes to the emerging markets, normally it is in between 0 and 4. But if you see the inflation, it has reached to the maximum of 12. Maximum of 12 in case of Germany. In case of UK, I think it is something related close to 11.5 to 12. And if you take the case of the United States of America, once it reached to the level of I think 9, and after it has started reducing. So, though the inflation levels in developing economy is high, but the rate at which the increase happened is very high in advanced economies, and the advanced economies have seen a highest inflation in the last 2 to 3 decades. But whereas in case of emerging economies, the inflation is high, but when it compares with its own history, it is not that high. Okay. So again, when it comes to the increase in interest rates by the Fed, that means the Central Bank of United States of America. So the interest rates earlier were so close to the 0, that means 0, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, that is the level. But after February 22, you can see the jump in increase in interest rate. This is happened to tame the inflation. That is how they have started tightening. If they tighten, definitely it will impact the emerging markets, because when United States of America is increasing the interest rate, definitely it attracts the investments which are in the investments which are there in the foreign countries, and these investments are in dollar, so definitely they will attract towards the United States of America because the interest rate is high. And if you see the South Africa, Canada, South Korea, India, there is an outward flow of investments, that too portfolio investments, outward flow of the investment. Whereas in some countries like Brazil, Indonesia, Japan, Malaysia, still there is an inflow, but when it comes to some major countries, there is an outflow. So that will impact definitely the rupee value and also the level of foreign exchange reserves. And when it comes to the growth projections from the IMF, you can see all the world growth they have given: advanced economies, US, Euro, UK, Japan, emerging markets, China and India. The highest growth rate is in India. If you see any of the country or any of the group, that means major countries and major groups, they haven't experiencing such a level of growth rate. That is why the government always used to say like India is the fastest growing major economy in the world, even in this critical condition. Okay, you can see the level of growth rates. China's industrial production growth, because just now I told you the impact of China, because certainly China has shown its impact in the last year. So it has dipped down because of some policies taken up by the China. Yeah, core debt of the most major economies except India is high as compared to 2008. So this is something related to the core debt of the major economies that they are comparing, because during the COVID-19, the revenues of all the countries has come down because of no economic activity. After that also, because of these other impacts which I have mentioned, there is still there is an economic activity, but there is no much progress in economic activity, and it has its own impact on the revenue implications of every government. So definitely to meet the expenditure needs, they will go for the debt, and individuals at the individual level, they will go for the debt. Companies at the companies level, they will go for the debt. Governments at the government level, they will go for the debt. But there is an argument like lot of debt is increasing in the world. Yes, that is obvious. Indian debt is also increasing. Yes, that is also obvious. But definitely we need to maintain some discipline. But if you compare the level of debt, here they have given household debt, private non-financial debt, that means private companies debt, and government debt, they have given total debt as a percentage of GDP, as a percentage of their respective GDP. If you see the total, even if you take the total debt, or even if you take the household debt, private non-financial debt or government debt, the Indian, if you take a cumulative impact of all these things, and if you compare it with the 2008, If you compare it with the 2008, why we are taking 2008? In the 2008 also there was a similar scenario, and the countries goes for more debt and more loose monetary policy. So if you compare it with the 2008, a change since 2008 Q2, and if you take the present day, the level of debt, the change happened negatively. That means it reduced. No sir, governments are taking more debt. How come you say that the debt is low? No, the government debt is increased. The government debt is increased. But when it comes to the household debt and private non-financial debt, it reduced. And if you take the case of the other countries, you can see the change. That means the debt burden on whole India, Indian government, Indian individuals, Indian companies is less compared to the other countries. That is what you must draw the conclusion from here. And you can see the level of the global average debt is 248% of the global GDP. And you can see all the countries. Okay, I think Mexico is less. That is the only thing. But whereas Mexico is less, but when you compare to the 2008 level, the Mexico, the change in Mexico, the change happened in the case of Mexico is very high compared to the India. Okay, so this is something related to the debt. Next, macroeconomic and growth challenges in the Indian economy. This is related to the real GDP. Real GDP means GDP adjusted to the level of inflation and the growth rate. Yes, pandemic, there is a dip, there is a V-shaped recovery, after that sustaining. Sir, why it is not going like this? No, it is because of the base effect. Here we have grown at the high level, no, definitely it will stabilize. But whereas if you see in the absolute term, there is an increase, real GDP. Okay, there is an absolute. Okay, so this is GDP growth level and this is the real GDP number. Okay, broad-based growth driven by demand and investment. You see GVA components, so gross value added components from 2019, if you take up to 2023, even during the pandemic, agriculture has grown. So here agriculture has grown at a highest level during the pandemic. This high growth will certainly have its own base impact. That is why in the subsequent months it has subsequent years it has little bit reduced. Okay, so that is one. And again, when it comes to the industry and services, during the COVID-19 time there was a dip, but after that they recovered. But again during the Russia-Ukraine war, the industrial activity little bit it is again showing a downward trend, whereas services has its own resilience. That is why there is no much reduction, and even the graph is showing something like a flat. Okay, so agriculture will continue like this. Okay, this is the level of growth. And if you looking into the different components of the GDP, so that is private final consumer expenditure, that means it's a consumption in the economy. Gross fixed capital formation, so capital formation can happen because of both government expenditure and the private investment, G plus I, and it is related to the exports and imports. So these four components together you call it as GDP. So if you observe the imports, yes, the import bill is increased compared to the last year and before that year. Whereas when it comes to the exports, okay, exports are performing little bit good, and when it comes to the gross fixed capital formation, it increased because especially the public expenditure or the capital expenditure by the government, both union and state, increased. So that has added. Okay, anyway, when it comes to the consumption, I think consumption is at the flat level. But this investment increased, exports little bit increased, imports also increased. So the increased imports can be compensated by exports and as well as the GFCF, because imports are increasing means you have to pay more. Okay, so this is the analysis. So definitely when you are reading about the GDP, you have to take these aspects. Okay, CPA inflation eased back to RBI's target range. So here if you see February 22, this is what Russia-Ukraine war took place in that month. You can see clearly the level of inflation prior to that and level of inflation after that. That means even during the pandemic, This is an aberration except for 1 month, but we have maintained a comfortable level of inflation, that is 4 plus or minus 2%. That is the range that you must follow under the monetary policy framework. Okay, we have followed it. But the inflation took place in India is driven by external factors. You can see it clearly. And it is not only the external factor, there is another domestic factor that survey has given: excessive heat and unseasonal rains. So excessive heat in the last year has impacted the wheat production, and there are some unseasonal rains has impacted the food grain, the inflation in food items. So mostly the international causes, that is increase in import prices of various commodities including your petroleum, natural gas, fertilizers, and also different metals. And apart from that, excessive heat and unseasonal rains has also contributed. That is the reason why the inflation is high. Okay, now it is stabilizing. Even if you see the food prices, you see suddenly the food prices increase. Not that every food item that we are importing, but because of this excessive heat and unseasonal rains, even food prices increased. But anyhow, now it is coming down. Just have an idea about the causes of the inflation. And if you're looking into the depreciation or appreciation of the currency, because of the monetary tightening by the Fed reserves, and all the currencies are depreciated, only Mexican currency is only appreciated, but remaining all are depreciated. And it is not only Indian currency that is depreciating, but there are other currencies like South Africa, Brazil, Australia, which have depreciated much higher than the Indian rupee, and Indonesia, India, China are on par, and they are all at the same level. Okay, so even in depreciation also, Indian rupee depreciation is not worser. There are many countries that are still worser than Indian rupee depreciation. That is what economic survey is saying. Okay. And to tame this inflation, Government of India has taken up various measures, like the government cut excise and custom duties and restricted the exports to restrain inflation. Yes, whichever is required to import on that items, we reduce the taxes, and on which of the items we need to import, we reduce the taxes on it, and the items which we are exporting, on that they put a ban, because on wheat we put a export ban, so that the wheat can be used in India, so that it reduces the prices or stabilize the prices. And apart from that, Reserve Bank of India has also taken decision by increasing the interest rate, so that you can contain. So on both the sides we have taken the decision, from both government side and as well as the Reserve Bank of India side. Okay. Widening current account deficit. Certainly current account deficit is widened because the import prices are increased, especially in goods and services. Though in case of the secondary income, that unilateral transfer, the remittances that we are bringing, that is having its that is showing positive trend, but whereas when it comes to the goods and services, that is showing a negative trend. And if you see the last 2 quarters of 2022-23, there is a negative trend in the current account. That means there is a current account deficit. If the current account deficit is high, means definitely you have to pay more dollars. That will impact your forex reserves and as well as the currency value. Okay. And if you adequate foreign exchange reserves, if you see that there was a time where there is a highest level of foreign exchange reserves, but you see just February 2022, after that your foreign exchange reserves started decreasing. Why? Because the increase in prices of the crude oil and other imported items. That is because of Russia-Ukraine war. That is why we have spent more reduced. And again, why there is a sudden dip? Because here United States of America has started increasing the interest rate. That led to the moving away of the investments, especially FPS from India. So that has reduced much. So this is the impact. But again, now we are recovering. So rupee has been one of the better performing currencies worldwide, but the modest depreciation underwent may have added domestic inflationary pressure besides widening current account deficit. See, there are reasons for the inflation and there are reasons for the current account deficit. So I said just reasons for the inflation. Yes, one is international reason, second one is domestic reason, that is excess rain and unseasonal excess heat and unseasonal rain. Whereas when it comes to the current account deficit, just now I shown because of Russia-Ukraine war, it has increased the cost of imports. But when inflation took place and when there is a current account deficit, definitely it has its own impact on rupee value. Rupee depreciated. The depreciated rupee will again causes the inflation. The depreciated rupee will again increases your import burden, that will again enhance the current account deficit. It's like a circular thing. Inflation, current account deficit has reduced the led to the depreciation of currency. Depreciation of the currency causes inflation and as well as widening of current account deficit. So that is how it is happening.
Amrita IAS Academy.